Welcome, everybody. Welcome. If you could go ahead and mute your microphones. Welcome to everybody on the West Coast, everybody in the middle, everybody on the East Coast. I can see you, Michael Sachs. Oh, long time no see. Okay, we are going to get ready. So welcome to the Sport and Performance Psychology Department webinar. We're very excited to be hosting you here at Holy Names University. This is being recorded so people can watch it afterwards. And my name is Dr. Alison Pope-Rodius, and we are going to be hosting this wonderful event for you today. So just a few housekeeping bits and pieces. We're going to take questions at the end. So after about 50 minutes, Aaron is going to wrap up and take questions at the end, but feel free to ask questions in the chat box and we'll make sure that he gets that information. Then we're going to stop the recording after an hour, and he has kindly agreed to stay on the call. So if you would like to be on the call and ask him some more questions, then you're more than welcome to stay. Tomorrow or the next day at the latest, you will receive the book as well as a PDF in the form of a PDF. So we're excited to be able to offer that as well. And he is also going to give a copy of his slides as well. So today's hashtag, for those of you who are social media savvy and love to be able to do that, is baseball brain. So hashtag baseball brain. Please use the hashtag and let us know all the interesting nuggets that you're getting out of the talk. So thank you. We'll have the next slide. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our brand new programs because we're very excited. We're in our first year here at Holy Names. And so we have a master's in applied sport and performance psychology. And that is geared around helping people learn all about sport and performance psychology. And the focus is on training people to be practitioners. Our curriculum is fully aligned with the requirements for applied sports psychology through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. And we offer all the coursework and all the hours that you would need for that. So we're extremely excited to be able to offer that. In addition, we also have a certificate in sport and performance psychology, and we offer that to people who already have a psychology background who might want the extra classes for ASP certification to become a CMPC, a certified mental performance consultant, or it might be of interest to people who are coaches and trainers and just want an introduction to the field. And so that involves 5 courses out of our master's degree. We offer everything online, on campus, when we can, outside of this pandemic. And in addition, you can do a hybrid. So you can choose to do one or the other, or you can do a combination. The only thing that you have to be here on campus for is our 2-week residency at the end of your first year. So if you would like to know more about our programs, you can contact me. My email address is there on the slides, and also we're going to put it in the chat box. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the speaker. However, I'm not going to introduce the speaker. I am going to introduce the person who is introducing the speaker. So it is my honor and privilege to introduce my colleague who used to be one of my students, and the speaker also used to be one of my students a long time ago. And so Professor Dannery Rosario will do the honors of introducing his friend and colleague. Take it away, Dannery.
Thank you. And I had to ask Allison this permission because it was just an honor to be able to introduce the author, Aaron Weinstein. As Allison mentioned, we're both former students of Allison. And in fact, the very first day of the intro to sports psychology class, I sat next to none other than Aaron Weinstein. And ever since that day that we sat next to each other, we became the closest of friends, and have seen him just throughout his career just evolve and become just the practitioner and professional that he is today, and very proud of what he's been able to do in his career. But specifically to this event, the book, The Baseball Brain, mental game training for developing baseball player. And so I know that a great amount of work went into this book, as I'm sure all writers can attest to. But Aaron has a strong passion for the field, for baseball. And after reading this book, it's a fascinating book that has many, many nuggets of sport psychology, but also it is a element of baseball history that I enjoyed in reading his book and hearing the stories of his time working with the California State University Northridge baseball team from 2015 2019. So with great pleasure and honor, I would like to introduce Aaron Weinstein.
Thank you very much to everybody who's come today. Of course, to my good friend Dannery for introducing me, and to Dr. Rodius for allowing me to do this through Holy Names University. So I'm really excited here because this has been a project that was a long time in the works. And so obviously Holy Names is putting this on for me, and I'll get to the connection with them in a few slides. But the university that you're going to see right here is Cal State Northridge. And CSUN, as it is affectionately known, is where I grew up here. Okay, so I grew up in Northridge, California, and I've been teaching at CSUN since about 2013. Okay, in the spring there. And so, if you actually take a look down the right field line of this picture, and you go way down there, and you see some of these white buildings, that is actually where our Kinesiology Department is at CSUN. And so essentially what I was able to do for these 4 years of being a consultant for our baseball team on campus is I got to teach, and then I literally could just walk right over and go to the game or practice or whatever it may be. So it was just a wonderful time and relationship that we were able to develop. And it's the basis for this book. And so that's really what we're here obviously to discuss today. But I wanted to basically, for the first part of this, take you through a little bit of an origin story of where this book came from. I enjoy hearing like where music or art, or where are these inspirations and how did it eventually come into be this project. So that's what I want to do for the first part of our discussion today. And then the second part is I'm going to actually go into the specific chapters and just give you an overview of why they're there and maybe a story or two from each of them. So to start, we have to go back to the beginning, and that's where I grew up playing baseball, since 5 years old here in Northridge. I was a shortstop, I was a pitcher, and really baseball was my first love, okay? Now, what you have to understand about where I come from, the San Fernando Valley and Los Angeles is an absolute hotbed for baseball talent, okay? We produce, as you can see by this graph, so many professional baseball players. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with our weather here. We have baseball weather year round, so we can play. And I even have a picture up here. I'm not in this picture, but I wanted to put it in there. It was from the 1994 Northridge Little League team that won the Little League World Series, okay? And so this is the grade ahead of me. But I was playing with them and all these wonderful players who have come out of this area growing up, and obviously it makes you that much better. And even in my Granada Hills High School, where I graduated from, John Elway, the Hall of Fame football player, he's a legend, but I graduated with Ryan Braun. And, Ryan is obviously still playing for the Milwaukee Brewers, and he's their home run king. So, this is just kind of what the Valley does, is we produce the athletes and we produce a ton of baseball players. Now, for me personally, though, I had a couple of developmental things come along, okay? So physically, when I was 15, I was pitching and I did not warm up well enough. And honestly, I tore my rotator cuff because of that lack of preparation. And if I'm being honest, it just never fully healed. And I was never the same player. And I kind of tried to come back a couple of years later and play, but it just was never the same. And so physically, it was tough, you know, because I wasn't prepared, because it was a sport that I really loved to play. But here's something that I'm going to be honest about. Mentally, even before my injury, you know, baseball started to become a lot more serious. Obviously, you're playing with these great players, but then you start getting closer to high school ball, and then in high school ball, and, you know, you have scouts, and it becomes a lot to deal with. And any athlete in any sport who goes through this process, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. So even if I had not had the injury, you know, who knows how it would have played out, but I'm being honest here, I did have mental game issues even beforehand, and even though I was a good player. But there's something interesting that I wanted to tell you that you won't find in the book. And this was when I was a shortstop. When the pitcher would get in trouble, you know, and he would need a, you know, a mound visit. Obviously, the coach normally is the one who does this. But when I was shortstop, and because I was a pitcher and I knew our pitching staff, I would go literally every time they were in trouble to the mound and talk to them. And I would say a couple words, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then go back to my position. And I don't know how it started or why I even did it, but to then later in my life become a consultant and work with athletes in this manner, you know, it really kind of came full circle. And it was just, you know, it wasn't an accident. Okay. Now, the next part where we pick up this story is becoming a graduate student at John F. Kennedy University. And this is my relationship with Dannery and Dr. Rodius and a lot of the faculty there, and a lot of the other people who are going to be doing some of these book talks as well. And so I got my master's in sports psychology there. But my reason, honestly, for even going into sports psychology was I wanted to learn more about some of these athletic problems that I had when I was younger. And, you know, I felt it. Obviously, my injury kind of gave me an excuse to not have to worry about it anymore. But I wanted to learn and understand what happened there and how I could help other athletes who are going through these same things that I, you know, was going to go through. How can I help them improve and overcome these obstacles and realize it's part of the process? Now, what I did not expect going to graduate school was the pain and the punishment that becoming a writer would give to me. And so my first real writing assignment, was doing my research project, my thesis, mental toughness in professional poker players. And so I interviewed and analyzed all these pro poker players and wrote a big project, obviously, and finished it. And it taught me how to write one and finish one. And I remember actually just holding it. You know, I held the vinyl in my hand of it. And I thought, you know what, it would be so cool to write a book. And that's honestly the first time I had thought about writing one. And so what a lot of people don't know is I actually tried to write a book already based on my poker research. And I wrote for multiple years, but I couldn't finish it. And, you know, at the time I didn't understand why, but I just hadn't developed enough of a writing style. I didn't have enough skill. So even though my effort and my motivation was there, I just didn't have the ability, quite honestly. And so it was, again, beating my head against a wall. But here's the thing. I would not have this book today if I did not fail in trying to write this book on poker. And I think that's a really good lesson because you may not get the success you want right away, but you are still learning skills that later on may connect with what you also really want to do and produce. And so looking back now, you know, it was part of my journey, absolutely, to go through this process and even fail at trying to write. But where this really gets going is when I became a performance consultant. And so how it began was we got a new head coach on campus, Coach Greg Moore, who you can see sitting in this photo in the red there. And I just sent him an email just saying, hey, you know, I'm a big baseball fan from the Valley here. I teach, and I just want to welcome you and, you know, very excited to have you. And that started the connection with Coach Moore. And come to find out, he had graduate research, what he called Diamond University, which is a life skills program that he teaches his players about. So it was a really good fit. And we developed this relationship ongoing. And that's when I started going to all these practices and games, road trips.
Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Okay, can everybody hear me now? Okay. So what's interesting though about this too was I actually was given an assignment by the coach to write in our school paper. And so I had this little section called the Weinstein window, which I wrote a couple, I wrote like 4 or 5 different articles, attached to the baseball program. But again, that was something I didn't realize it, but it was continuing to build this skill set and this repertoire in terms of becoming a writer. And so really my philosophy was I was just going to always be there, but I wasn't going to force players to talk to me. But just being there and being present and knowing baseball, you started to build this good relationship and players would come speak with me. And that's also where I started carrying this notebook around. And so I had it with me everywhere I went. And I took notes from things I was seeing or conversations. And, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, you come talk to me and I'm going to write down everything you say. But it was just more trends and things that I continued to see. I was like, I want to use this and I want to remember this potentially for this book. And so that's how I really collected a lot of these resources. And maybe one day it was Tommy Lasorda talking to the team or a pro baseball player or whatever it is. But I just continued to work at it and take these notes knowing I was going to want them. And so what you will see again in this book is really a combination of performance psychology, counseling psychology, and even baseball psychology as well. And so whether it's struggling to get over errors, or maybe you have some off-field issues that have nothing to do with baseball, but that is still affecting your baseball, playing ability. Or, hey, scouts. I mean, that is something that, obviously there's scouting in all sports now, but for baseball specifically, that is just a part of the game where as soon as you start to show some talent, you're going to have scouts come. We had scout days, where literally we'd have hundreds come and watch the team. They were there at practices and games, always watching. So how do you deal with that? And I was asked about that over and over again, by a lot of these players, is how to mentally just kind of block that out. So when you really look at how this book began to be formed, okay? We've got to, again, go to this writing process. And so how I even started when I said, okay, I've got some good notes. I need to become, though, educated in what is out there. And so what I did was I read every baseball psychology book that I could find. Obviously, the bigger ones with Dr. Ken Ravizza and Harvey Dorfman and all those, legendary people in our field. But I read everything, and I only read it the one time. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to know what was out there, but I didn't want to repeat and just say exactly what they were saying. So that was kind of my basis in my education of what is out there now. Then obviously I went back and I had to edit all of these notes that were all over the place. And I cannot tell you how miserable an experience that really was and how difficult mentally writing actually is. And, no matter how good you are at it, you're going to have days where you don't write a thing and you just think about it all day and you can't get it out on paper. And so that's what this process was making all these decisions. What do I keep in and leave out and cut out the private stuff? And, I made sure I got approval from also every single player who's in here about what I wrote. And so that was also very important because, when you're talking about psychology and athletes, their trust factor is huge there. But what I can say is I was writing for years, and even, as Dannery can attest to, I told him about it. And, I had him read original, works years ago. And I literally thought I was done in 2018. Okay. I said, I'm done. It's great. And I put it down and I read it again. And I'm like, something's wrong here. And then I did that again in 2019. I thought I was done, but I wasn't. And so it was this process where you keep thinking you've worked at it, you've done everything, but it's not ready yet. And so some of that was actually just my own perfectionism. I was, worried and concerned. When you put a book out there, you're saying it's worth your time to read, whether it is or not. And so that takes a huge mental hurdle for every author to overcome this. And so perfectionism is certainly something that has helped me become a better writer, but it was also what was preventing me from finishing. So what I had to do, honestly, was I was in this writing process mindset, and I needed to get into a publishing mindset. That is what I had not done yet. And so, honestly, COVID came along. We're obviously quarantined, impacts the world in just so many different ways. And I sat there and I said, I've been wanting to do this book forever. I've talked about it. The world is in shambles right now. You have no excuses not to just put your head down and finish this. Okay, whether it's the worst book ever, the best book ever, it doesn't matter anymore. You just need to do this for you. And that is basically how it started. And I put my head down and I read it over and over and I edited. And then I honestly had to get help. That was something that I hadn't done enough of. And so I found an editor and a cover designer for me on this website called Readsy. And they were tremendous. And they absolutely helped me in these final stages, take what I had and then get over that hump. And, I was able to then publish it, July 28th in 2020. And it was probably, about 4 or 5 months straight of this is all I thought about. And I made sure no matter what, even if it killed me, I was going to finish this book. That's how important it was. And quite honestly, as I've realized, you want to be a finisher in sport or in anything, that's what it takes. And it brought everything out in me. And where I knew I had grown was, I remember saying this actually to the editor. And I said, listen, if there are any other mistakes, they're meant to be in there. And that was the scariest thing, was producing a book. And all of a sudden I'm getting all these typos and grammatical errors and all these things back. And I had to get over that, trust the people I worked with, and just say, if they're in there, so be it, So that is, again, part of this growth mindset that I had to embody to be able to finish this. And so when you look at this final product, I know it's a bit overwhelming here. This is just all the chapters and then all of the sections that are laid out within each of them. And I'm going to go through them a little bit more specifically, so don't feel like you have to take this in right now. But when you see this, you can understand also why it took so long. It was almost a 4-year process from the first notes I took to actually publishing it. And if I'm being honest, I probably have another half a book at least that I cut out. So it could have been much, much longer as well, which was, again, one of the hurdles. I just had too much information. And so maybe I will write another one, and I potentially have plans to do that later on. But I'm very happy with what it was cut down to and what it really evolved into as well. So what you generally will see in each of these chapters is there's all these stories of particular players or situations, or even pro ball players and things that I've heard from them. But how I start out each chapter is I tell a little story about one of our players from our baseball team. And so you can see here, there's a picture of Justin Turner. Justin was a fantastic baseball player, and I thought he was a great representative when we're talking about this idea of a mental game foundation. So really, this chapter, when you look at the sections, it's almost like a sport psych 101 class, where you're introducing some of these basic ideas to the athlete. And there's certainly things I never really understood or thought about. And so, Justin's a perfect example. Again, he was very mentally strong, and he had so many of these things going for him that I thought he would be a good way to start this out. So what we're actually going to do right now is we're going to take 5 minutes. And I believe that the intro was mailed out to you. So if you have that in your email, I would like you to go to that. And it's just pages 4 to 6. It's just the opening of chapter 1 that I want you to read. But for those of you who do not have access to that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share this PDF with you. Okay, so just give me 1 second here. And so you see here on the left side, what you will be seeing is that's just the introduction. You don't have to worry about that. I'm talking about a lot of those things. But you're going to read just this opening to chapter 1 here. And so you can see here, this is page 4. It's obviously very short. I will go wait a minute or so, and then I will go down, and then you can read page 5 and 6. And so this is just that fully encapsulated story about Justin, okay? So I'm going to get 5 minutes on the clock, and we can do a little bit of reading together, okay? And just read again this opening intro chapter here. Let's maybe take about 1 more minute. I'm gonna head back now to our presentation, pick up where we left off. I hope you guys enjoyed reading that. And honestly, to show you, I am not lying about how good Justin is, okay? He is in the minor leagues, you know, as I say, he got drafted there. He's right now at spring training, trying to earn a spot on the Cardinals. And this was him last year in right field, okay? Not bad. Not bad, Justin. And I watched him do things like this, you know, over and over. He was just a fantastic all-around baseball player. And he was consistent. He was mentally strong. You know, he really did have, you know, all the mental attributes that you need. And he obviously had the ability, as you can see here. Now, when we get to chapter 2, now we're going to start to dive a little bit more into baseball psychology, okay? And I love this quote from Sandy Koufax. He says, "I became a good pitcher when I stopped trying to make them miss the ball and started trying to make them hit it." And for all pitchers, you know what it's like, where it's like, just please don't hit this ball, please don't hit it. And that's the exact wrong mindset that you can possibly have, obviously, as a pitcher. Now, one thing that I did have experience with as a starting pitcher is what a game day is really like. And, you know, even today, I mean, I knew I was doing this presentation, but I had to think about it all day. And so certainly managing things like that mentally, and if you're a starter and you've got all day to think about it, well, how is that going to impact you? And so one of the things I discuss, and you see this beautiful photo here of Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. It's beautiful for everybody but pitchers, because very thin air. You're not going to get the same break on your breaking balls because of that thin air. The ball's going to fly more, and the field is enormous. So you're going to have lots of just little dinks and dunks that are going to drop for base hits. And so pitchers are aware of this long before they ever throw their first pitch. And so this is an idea related to this self-fulfilling prophecy of what you're thinking about. If you give yourself all these excuses about how awful it's going to be, chances are the performance isn't going to be that great. So Coors Field is a perfect mental test for a pitcher to go into as a professional. And so this is, again, just one of the many different elements that we can talk about related to pitching psychology. Now, how about for my hitters out there, okay? And what I can say about hitters is that they are, the good ones at least, they're masochists, okay? They enjoy pain and misery because you have to. It's very much like writing, okay? Because you have very little gratification, quite honestly, when you go through the process, you know? And it's so difficult mentally to just keep going and stick to the process, because what a lot of players do is they stare at their statistics all the time. So one of the things I talk about is, how often do you look at your stats? Is it every day? Is it 10 times a day? You know, I would have players tell me, you know, I'm literally every 5 minutes looking at my stats, and I'm not even playing a game today, but I just keep looking at them, hoping that they're going to change. So if you can start to rewire processes like that and get players to understand, hey, you're going to go through a slump. It's going to happen as a hitter because hitting is so difficult. But can you minimize that slump from, let's say, 8 games to 5 or 6 games? Well, if you can do that for every slump that you have, well, at the end of a season, that's going to start to add up. And if you can start to do multiple things like that, where you're cutting down the negatives and you're bringing out the positives, and you need it as a hitter, that is something that can take you a long way in this game. Because I've seen many hitters that were good enough, okay? They had the talent, but they couldn't mentally deal with what came with the grind that is the game and all the games and how tired they were. And they just couldn't handle not having enough success, and it wrote them out of the game. So that's one of these attributes that you need if you want to be an offensive player in baseball. Now, the next chapter, we look at something near and dear to my heart, and this is fielding, okay? And so if I had went anywhere in the baseball world as a player, it would have been because of my glove. You know, I was a really good fielder. But something that happens to really good fielders that I didn't understand at the time was that it was mentally a detriment to me. And the reason is because I didn't make many errors. But when I did, I would go into the tank. And it's because I was so frustrated and embarrassed, and I couldn't believe it because I was so used to always making the plays. I had no idea about creating a routine, or that really everyone's going to make errors, just like Derek Jeter here. Okay. But it's really how you respond to an error. And as long as you make that next play, like, that is the game. And so that's where, if I could go back, that's what I would have helped myself with the most, is understanding that it's going to happen where you're going to make errors no matter how good you are. You're not going to make 100% of the plays. It's just not going to happen. But you can make 100% of those plays after an error. And so that is a really good mindset to start building in there, because if you don't, the brain can run amok. And mine absolutely did. And that's this chapter, the section called the Field of Nightmares. Okay. It's not the Field of Dreams all the time. Trust me. It's the Field of Nightmares for a lot of these players out there when it comes to being a fielder. Now, chapter 5 is where I wanted to introduce a lot of mental skills training concepts. And so a huge aspect in baseball is this downtime that exists. And I mentioned this multiple times throughout the book, because you're not playing very much. The actual time where the ball is in play is so small compared to how long you're out on the field. You have to learn how to train your brain to think when you're not playing. And it's different than many other sports. This is why baseball is much more like golf than it is like a basketball or hockey. So self-talk control, being able to take a breath and slow things down, just like you can see from Randy Johnson and Troy Tulowitzki right here. Being able to use imagery and visualization and prepare. I talked with these players so often about sitting in the dugout before games and seeing what they wanted to happen, seeing things, for example, that perhaps weren't going to go their way, but how are they going to respond to it? What are you going to do when the umpire makes a call against you? And so if you can visualize and you can input a lot of these skills, that's when now some of these topics that were brought up previously, now you start to get solutions for those. And it hits home on this point that mental skills are also trainable, which it is not just a natural thing that everybody, all the great players have these things. You can actively train them and get better at them. And that's really when, if you want to find out how good you are at something, or honestly reach your full potential, you start to go through these skills training concepts. And that's what provides this foundation for you. And what's interesting to note, even about the writing process, is this chapter was actually part of chapter 1 originally. It was all one chapter. And when my editor did it, he sent it back and I read it and I was like, I like everything in it. It just doesn't fit. It's too long. So I ended up breaking these down, and I really debated about, do I put this chapter as chapter 2 or 5? And that's just one of the things, again, that all writers will tell you. They're sitting there. It's not like it's laid out for you. You have to put a lot of time and thought. And even if you're not 100% sure, sometimes you just have to make a decision and go for it. So if you read this as like chapter 2, it would probably make the reading a bit different. But I believe that where I ended up putting this chapter, it was the right place, because we introduced all these concepts and basic ideas. And then now we're going to give you some of these skills to hone and get better at as you progress. And so where this book wraps up is looking at the idea of player development. Okay. And I talk about, who you can see here in a couple pictures, Kenny Rosenberg, to open this chapter. And if you play baseball for any period of time and you go far in it, you're going to be put through the ringer. You're going to be just bombarded with all of these things that are related to really just going through the process of finding out how good you can be. And so Kenny was a perfect example of this, because when Kenny came in as a freshman, he wasn't in good enough shape. He ended up getting hurt, and he went through also just like what every freshman does when they become a Division I baseball player. As you see in this quote up there, you realize how good your teammates now are, because all these high school players were the best on their team. And then they come in now to college and all the best are together. So it's very scary for a lot of athletes to go through this as a freshman. And then you add in an injury or whatever, or not, and you're not playing. And so it can weed people out of the game who were good enough. Okay. And I've seen that happen. Kenny was this person who he took it all in stride. Obviously didn't make him happy to go through it, but he learned from it. Then he started really picking the brain of Coach Greg Moore, who you can see here over and over, talking to me and anyone he could honestly take anything from, okay? Asking questions all the time. And what do you know? A couple of years later, Kenny all of a sudden develops into a stud left-handed pitcher and gets drafted by the Rays when he was never on the radar at all going into college, okay? And it's a really, really great example of how far someone can come when they want to. And that's the idea with player development, is you're taking things year to year and you don't get too high or too low. You know, not that you don't care, but you have this big picture perspective. Okay, I'm going to just keep getting better and stick to my process. And I'm going to go through these things because this is what happens if you're a baseball player. And if you keep doing that and you have this ability, eventually things are going to start working out for you. You know, they really are. And again, to show you how good Kenny is, you know, this was actually after he got drafted. This is him in the minors, and he's out there right now at spring training, working, trying to become, you know, a pro as well, get into the Tampa Bay Rays pro team, because I believe he was in AA last time I checked. And so take a look at just his mound demeanor, his control, and then obviously you can see his pitch right here, okay? And so this is something that developed for him. Okay, I watched him build this process year after year. And all of a sudden you see him break that off, and you can see that it's just nasty, okay? And let's look at this pitch again. I mean, it is just so beautiful, Kenny, I gotta say, you know, and he worked on this over and over and over and through thousands of pitches and did mental training and talked with these coaches just so that he could get to the point to be able to do this consistently, which he can. And so again, you can use Kenny as an example for any ball players out there that you can get to the pinnacle, but you just got to take things and you keep learning from them and get better, as opposed to letting it destroy you mentally. So when we're really looking at this last piece now of the puzzle, okay, I've told you this origin story and I've made these connections for you about where the book came from, but we have to ask the most important question, which is the why, okay? So why did I write a book at all? Okay, well, I've kind of alluded to this a bit, but I wanted to put something out into the world. That was very, very important to me. And I needed to learn how to finish a bigger project, okay? And I still had that sting and that bad taste in my mouth from failing to write that book. I've written like a couple scripts and things, and I just never went anywhere with it. And so I had to learn how to finish this and actually put it out there and overcome my own perfectionism. And so that was part of my motivation as well. And something also I do want to point out is, you know, of course I would love to sell a zillion copies of it. And that would be wonderful. But I didn't write this book to make money. And I really mean that. You know, I wrote this to help other players like myself when I was growing up and give people more of an updated book with some of these ideas that I thought could really benefit them. And so it was much more about the impact on the baseball community and the world than it really was about making money. And so that's why, again, I'm sending you these copies, and certainly feel free to share it with other people. I'm totally okay with that. You know, and that's the point of it. It's to get out there and help these players as best as we can. And, you know, stuff you don't like, leave it. And the stuff that you like in there, you know, take it and use it. And that's really what it's there for. But there is one other question that I think is important. And that is, why did I write this specific book? And I will tell you, it's for a lot of reasons. But when I really reflected and thought about this, which was a really cool thing to do kind of at the end, being able to go through and build this and just think about that experience of writing, this was closure to my mental game issues when I was younger. I got going through my graduate school and then doing this, I got answers to these questions I had. And, you know, you always say, well, if I could go back, I'd do it differently. But I actually know how I would do it differently now, as opposed to just saying that. And for me personally, that was a very important thing. Something else that was important was giving back to my hometown, which is why I did all this work to begin with. You know, I was there all the time. It was basically another full-time job on top of teaching. But I wanted to, again, be connected with again, these baseball players who come out of my area. And I just wanted to help in any way that I possibly could and give something for, you know, my hometown again to be proud of, because we're so proud of all these players. And maybe now this is something else too that we can just add to the pile there. And lastly, it's to remember that baseball psychology is fun to talk about. It's interesting. It's fascinating subject matter. And when you really get into it, and when you have conversations with the players, they enjoy it. You know, sometimes it can be kind of scary at first, but then you really dive into it and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. And why didn't I learn this when I was younger? And again, that's one of these reasons why I wrote this, is hopefully now we can get this into younger ball players' hands, you know, and we can start this mental process earlier. And really, one of the goals was to cut down on the learning curve for baseball players. And so if reading this book now can cut a year down on your mental game learning curve, I mean, that's so invaluable. And so again, I really want to say thank you to every one of you who came and listened to this today. And I hope that I gave you some good mental tips that you can even input, whether you're a baseball player or not, even within your own life. And again, I want to say thank you to Holy Names for putting this on, and for all my friends for being so supportive and being there for me. And again, I just really appreciate you listening, hearing some of these concepts, and I hope that you're really excited now to read it, and I look forward to hearing all the feedback from you. So please reach out, whether you hate it or love it or whatever. I can't wait to hear about it, okay, from you. So feel free to reach out to me as well. And if you end up wanting like a signed copy and you buy a hard copy, I'd be happy to sign it for you. We can work that out. Just get in touch with me also, okay? But again, thank you so much to everybody. And I believe that Dr. Rodius was going to come back on and just say a couple of words, and then I think we were going to dive into the questions and the answers, okay? So without further ado, let's turn it right back over to Dr. Rodius.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really informative. And I love listening to the process of, you know, writing the books, because it is incredibly challenging. So I think giving us little insight into that, and I think we're all looking forward to actually reading the book when we get hands on it as well. So I'm gonna hand it over to the participants. So if people have questions, we're gonna have 10 minutes of questions, then we'll officially finish the slot, but Erin is going to stay on and until all your questions have been answered, and we'll obviously stay on as well. So if you have questions, you can either type them in the box, but we would love you to just jump on audio and ideally show us your face as well and video. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand using the reactions button on the bottom, and then you'll jump to the top of the screen for us. So who has a question for Erin?
Who wants to start?
Well, I would like to kick things off with a question.
Oh boy. All right. Here we go.
I wrote a few down. So one of the things that when I read your book, even just being knowledgeable about baseball, I've learned a lot more about terminology, about the culture, and just it was just fascinating. I mentioned earlier about just the history of baseball along with mental skills. Given that there's a few graduate students here from our program, and possibly just young professionals, early professionals, what advice do you have for current students or recent graduates on how just to go about working with the baseball team? I know that Major League Baseball has invested so much into mental skills training, and many jobs have opened up over the years. But just in general, I know you've talked about it a little bit, but what advice would you give, aside from obviously reading your book? What advice do you have for those folks?
I mean, I think if you want to work in baseball, I mean, one, just being aware and honest of how well or you don't know the game, because I think that that's something, and because I've worked with baseball players, but I work with a bunch of different athletes in sports that I didn't necessarily know as well. And so I think just being honest about how well you know really does help. And like you said, what is really great is pro ball now. Basically all the organizations are bringing people in by the Groves now, and they're getting way more people who are becoming these consultants and who are basically being available for players to speak with. I think one of the things that I would think about if I wanted to work in this is also, are you more on the performance side or are you more on the counseling side? Because even in pro baseball, the positions that are being hired, they're different. So for me, what I enjoy personally is the performance aspect and dealing with some of those things, obviously, that I talk about in the book or have these chapters and sections on. Whereas some of them, people don't even want to deal with performance and it's more counseling. So I think it's figuring out what you want to do. And then also, what level do you want to work at? I originally thought I wanted to do pro ball, and working in college, I loved it and it was for me. So figuring out what actual level you would be comfortable at. And then some of it's just kind of the guts to reach out to people and you just start there and, accept some no's. I was lucky that Coach Moore was so receptive and it worked out so well. But sometimes you just got to put yourself out there too. So good question.
I think Lulu has her hand raised.
Sure.
Yes. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for the presentation. It was super insightful, very, very good to hear. A lot of the concepts that we're learning in our program right now as well kind of featured in there. And, some of the things that stuck out to me, especially were focus on process and a big emphasis on, you have to overcome, like you have to go through hard or bad shots in order to learn. Mm-hmm. And like, my background is I'm actually the women's golf assistant here, and I've played golf most of my life. And when you talked about how baseball is so much of the mental game is very similar to golf, I was just like immediately like, yeah, that's totally it. And so it's cool to hear that from a baseball perspective, because I'm not too knowledgeable about baseball, but to hear that the mental games are very similar is really, really interesting to me. And I wanted to actually ask, especially because you did touch on, as an author, talking about perfectionism. And so something I've noticed a lot in coaching now, as well as just in my years of playing golf, is the high emphasis on perfectionist tendencies in performance. And so in kind of breaking that down for yourself, or like if you have any advice, is like, how would you address that to like a player on the performance end, where their high emphasis is on like, the shot needs to be very precise and perfect. And it's hard because at a higher level, that's kind of what you need to do. So it's kind of, right. For me, it's that finding that balance between the two.
And I think you just said it, what we talk about even in my classes is like maladaptive versus adaptive perfectionism, meaning, perfectionism is going to be good and bad for you. And that's the thing, like, it drove me nuts as a writer and as an athlete, like literally insane. However, if I didn't have it, I never would have written this book. So what you see with a lot of the top athletes is they are perfectionists, and it kind of comes with the territory. And this is also why they're competitive and emotional. It's because that is the breed. And so it's getting them to embrace this perfectionism that helps them, but just understanding that if you're too hard on yourself, you're too much of a perfectionist, you are going to drain yourself mentally so much that you're going to burn out. And so you can want success. That's great. You need to have that, but you've got to find this balance, like you said, of where it just doesn't make your life so miserable that you start saying, I don't want to play the sport anymore. And for a lot of people, that is what happens, is it goes on too long. So it's, again, getting these athletes to understand that it's a good thing if you have this tendency, this personality trait of perfectionism, but we just also need to look out for a couple of these red flags that will probably occur. And again, if you've built a good relationship with the team, when you start to see some of these things pop up, then you can address them. And if you've had the conversation about perfectionism beforehand, then it just really makes that an easy topic to open up and discuss with them. And you know, smart athletes who are perfectionists, they're going to understand exactly what you're saying too. So I'm sure even as a golfer, you probably have a little bit of that. And again, that helps you relate to them too. But again, it's the necessary trait, I think, of a lot of the most successful people. It's just learning to manage it so it doesn't drive you absolutely insane. So hopefully that gave you some good insight. And that's a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great. Awesome.
Aaron, we've got a couple in the chat box. So
Okay.
Jason asks, have you done any research on basketball?
You know, I haven't done research, although I'm a big basketball fan. Go Lakers, okay? Obviously, go Dodgers as well. Okay, Dodgers are going back to back this year. But with basketball, I haven't done anything specific, but I have had a lot of actually basketball players who were my students, and we've had many different conversations. I'm curious, is there something specific that you were curious in terms of how to connect baseball with basketball, or was there any specific research you were looking for?
It was more of just the ideas that you have, or philosophy on the way to prepare for games the same way that you were for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a faster sport. You know, you can make that mistake and there's the next play that second. You don't have to wait till 3 innings later to make that next play. So I didn't know if you had some other advice for basketball players.
Well, you know, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I wrote this book, obviously it's baseball, okay, but chapters 2, 3, and 4 are really baseball specific. The feedback, there was actually another question here which connects with this about kind of what I've heard. I've had people who are baseball players read this. I've had many who are not just read this. And what they've said is that there is a lot of information that overlaps into other areas, regardless if you play this game or not. So chapters 1, 5, and 6, you honestly could read them as a basketball player, and you would be able to then take those things and input it. Obviously, I geared it towards baseball, but I tried to write a lot of it more as life skills and things that anybody could take and would carry over. So no pun intended with the basketball humor. So that's really what I would recommend, is check out especially chapters 1 and 5, because it's going to introduce you to some skills that even if it's baseball, you will be able to take over to basketball. And you know, that's what I've heard so much of, is how this connects with other areas and other things outside of just being baseball. And that's what I've also liked hearing, because that means, you know, it's not just a niche that can read this and take something from it. You know, anybody can. So good question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Aaron. We're actually at the end of our hour, but I think you answered the other question that we had in the chat box from Dr. Sachs himself, which covered about how has the response been from the players who've read the book. I think you touched on that a little bit as well. We are actually going to stay on the call, but we're going to stop the recording now. So thank you so much, everybody, for